Welcome back to This is VANCOLOUR. Are foreign nations meddling in British Columbia's politics? Our featured guest tonight dropped a bombshell last month when he joined Independent Member of Parliament Kevin Vuong, Charles Burton at Synopsys, and former CSIS intelligence officer Michelle Jeannot-Katsuya to reveal that someone with links to China's overseas influence arm, the United Front, is actually an advisor to BC Premier David Eby. Our guest is the author of Willful Blindness: How a Network of Narcos, Tycoons, and CCP Agents Infiltrated the West. He is, of course, investigative journalist and founder of the Bureau, Sam Cooper. And this conversation is brought to you by Pacific Sands Beach Resort in Tofino, laid-back luxury, as beachfront as it gets. Sam, what is the Canada Committee 100 Society, which you claim is led in Vancouver by journalist Ding Guo, who is apparently also an advisor to BC Premier David Eby?
I've been following this group since I obtained a tape recording of its discussion with Senator Yuen Pao, and I discovered that the BC senator and leaders of this society had discussed supporting political activity of Chinese communist affiliated groups in Canada. And this was, of course, a bit concerning to my investigations. In addition, Mo, I discovered the group lists an advisory board member that's recognized at a very high level in a Chinese Communist Party entity that the American Central Intelligence Agency says is responsible for Beijing's overseas influence operations. I also discovered the group's involved in supporting political candidates endorsed by Chinese Communist Party organs in Canada. And this comes from a Chinese state document. So my concern is the leader of this society, Ding Guo, being a community advisor for Premier David Eby, is advising David Eby directly on electoral politics. And at the same time, according to these Chinese state records, this society is involved in activities to influence Chinese diaspora voters so that they would vote in ways that Beijing favored. I should add, Mo, the society did respond to one of my questions, and it claims it's a nonpartisan group that's involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, and it says it's not involved in any inappropriate activities.
And so I want to be clear, are you saying that this group is directly involved in sort of these electoral activities, or do they have links to, or do they simply just have links to people, affiliated with the United Front? I'm trying to understand if it's links or if they're directly involved in foreign interference.
Well, Mo, the links of this group to United Front, that's official Beijing Communist Party entities, are clear and documented. When you have an advisory board member that is in a Chinese communist entity that's recognized by the Central Intelligence Agency, that's an undeniable link, and I would say an undeniable concern. In addition, I reported on a Chinese state document that listed this society among 13 community groups in Canada, which this Chinese state document says these groups are involved in I'm going to paraphrase, coaching Chinese Canadians on which ways to vote. The group, this document also points to China's use of the WeChat social media app in mobilizing Chinese Canadian voters. So, Mo, as you recognize, these are the types of activities that did come up in the Hogue Commission. And so I'm just pointing to documentation that says this group is involved in influencing Chinese Canadian voters. That's undeniable. And to me, that is a concern for my investigations.
So what do we know about Ding Guo's advisory role to BC Premier David Eby? Is it a paid role? Is it an informal advisor? What do we know there?
What we know there is it's a role clearly recognized by both Mr. Eby and Mr. Ding. What I found, the big question here is that David Eby, as Attorney General, approved a significant grant to this society, ostensibly to support the society's outreach to Chinese community citizens in British Columbia and anti-racism initiatives. And so as I wrote, those sound like very noble operations, but experts, including Charles Burton, who you mentioned, see two concerns. The concern is that a society that is recognized by the Chinese Communist Party for its role in reaching out to and educating Chinese Canadian voters. Clearly, that raises a concern that this group is receiving BC funds to do something that Beijing approves of. And so, whatever you think about politics in Canada, I think most Canadians now recognize that if Beijing is supporting community groups to coach voters in Canada, that's a concern.
So when we think of the evidence in terms of foreign interference in BC politics, specifically in elections that we have provincially, is that what it amounts to? Is that this group is basically coaching a diaspora of Chinese Canadian voters?
That is the concern that's raised in this Chinese Communist Party document from 2021 that I reported on. It specifically says that China supported or endorsed 41 nominated candidates in the 2019 election, which Beijing, according to the expert Charles Burton, had some interest in. That is, Beijing saw that these nominees, if elected to Canada's parliament, could potentially be of use to Beijing. And as Mr. Burton said, that's a perversion of Canadian democracy, because candidates and nominees should be of use and service to constituents in Canada. They should not be of service to a foreign government that very clearly, all the documentation from Ottawa now says Beijing is involved in foreign interference. With regards specifically to this society, very clearly, journalists involved in this society were involved in supporting a Liberal Party candidate in Richmond in 2021. And as I reported for the Bureau, these same journalists were involved in not supporting the opposition, Kenny Chiu from the Conservative Party. And the reason, according to my evidence and documents, is that, as the Hague Commission has shown, Kenny Chiu was attacked in WeChat, which you remember I've said was mentioned in a document that cites this society. Kenny Chiu was attacked because he raised a foreign agent registry bill, and all the evidence points to the fact that Beijing was very against such a registry bill because it would obviously put a spotlight on Beijing's community operations in Canada.
Now, that's the federal elections and federal politics, but anything with regard to BC politics or BC elections?
With regards to BC elections, these very same journalistic groups connected to this society, I and others noticed in open documents that the journalists of which I'm talking about linked to this group cast the Conservative Party leader as being in favor of, paraphrasing here, flooding BC with guns and weapons. That was very interesting to me, because this was the same type of narrative that was put out in some of these Beijing-controlled social media and media channels against Aaron O'Toole in the last election. With regards to Premier Eby, look, there's no evidence that he has wittingly benefited from any of these groups, but there very clearly is evidence that groups that Beijing is crediting for interfering in Canadian politics have supported Premier Eby's leadership run in 2022. That is documented.
And so, again, just to be clear, I know you just mentioned this, but I think it warrants repeating. There's no evidence to suggest that David Eby is a knowing participant or knowing benefactor of this type of interference.
That's right, Mo. I need to clearly say Premier Eby hasn't recently responded to my questions regarding his personal association and use of an advisor who is recognized also in Beijing state documentation. And so, of course, I would like to hear from Premier Eby. The issue here is that my sources, and I'm talking about people aware of RCMP and CSIS investigations, indicate that in the past few years, Premier Eby's government has been briefed on vulnerabilities that Mr. Eby's party has to some of these community groups, but I haven't heard Mr. Eby really acknowledge that type of briefings. But to be very clear to your question, I'm aware of no document that says that Mr. Eby knowingly received any benefits from these groups that are affiliated allegedly with Beijing. But the documents that I'm reporting on clearly raise some issues around those questions.
Really quickly, we have about 30 seconds here. I've seen some embassies and consulates organize various diasporas, mostly in the interest of trade and investment. What is it about the Canada Committee Society 100 that differentiates it from other types of groups like those?
Well, Mo, the differentiation with China and its relation through consulates to community groups in the diaspora and other countries, really, China's in a class of its own. All the documentation now says that these community groups are being unfortunately co-opted and leveraged by Beijing. This society that we're talking about was recognized on a Chinese state document, credited for influencing the 2019 election. So clearly, to me, as an investigator, that raises some questions for Premier Eby with regards to, does he still approve of providing grants to a society that is one of these community associations that Canadian intelligence does now have a concern with regards to?
Well, Sam, you are a gem. Thank you so much for your hard work, and thank you so much for your time tonight.
A pleasure being here, Mo. Thank you.
Folks, find him at the Bureau and make sure you pick up his incredible book, Willful Blindness. He is Sam Cooper. Thank you so much to Pacific Sands Beach Resort in Tofino for supporting local conversations about foreign interference. Now, after some business, we're gonna do it. We're gonna talk about bugs, specifically eating them. Up next.